A critic is a bundle of biases held loosely together by a sense of taste. Welcome to the Art Critic. This video is a response and a rebuttal to Kurzgesagt's video entitled Is the EU Democratic? Let's hope they don't change the title until the end of this video. So if you haven't seen their video, I would advise to check it out first. With the aim of promoting discourse and foster open dialogue, I would elicit an accomplice for debate and take on the mantle of Advocatus Diaboli. To Kurzgesagt's video work, Is the EU Democratic? ? Also, to be honest, I feel slightly cheated. And do not misunderstand me, I adore Kurzgesagt and watch the majority of their videos. I am subscribed to their channel since 3 or 4 years. I even clicked on their notification bell, for crying out loud. I am afraid that this time they produced a video that is incoherent, one-sided and aimed solely towards manipulating you. And this wouldn't even be the first time Kurzgesagt massively shot themselves in the foot. Remember their video, Everything You Know About Addiction is Wrong. Oh, sorry, I mean addiction, as they changed the title later on. And then even deleted the video because it was so oversimplified. It actually was misinforming their huge following. But I don't want to go too deep into that whole drama. But I recommend Coffee Breaks video on the whole drama if you are interested. And you know, I feel cheated because Kurzgesagt is a channel claiming to be an educational, scientific channel. Uninformed people may find their channel on particular subjects on the top of the search results, then watch their videos assuming all facts and figures in the video will be represented trustfully and factual. The producers and executives are not experts themselves. They do videos for money. Just listen to their founder and manager, Philipp Detmer.
Und dann aber halt auch, hey, können wir euch Geld geben, um so Filme zu machen? Und dann haben wir natürlich gesagt, ja, unbedingt.
Kurzgesagt is a video design and illustration agency. Anyone can hire them in order to produce a video. A brief look at their websites reveals former clients. But Kurzgesagt is not so independent and non-partisan as they would like you to believe, but more on that later in the video. Let's get to the video.
How democratic is the EU really? And does your vote actually achieve anything? In democratic states, public policies are based on the will of the people. But the people are not a coherent thing. Countless different groups are battling for influence and power to establish laws and rules that benefit them. In a working democracy, there are checks and balances that are supposed to create a fair environment where these battles can be fought. Term limits stop factions from dominating too much. But all of this ends at our borders.
I agree. Term limits do really end at our national borders. The position. President of the European Commission, for example, has no direct set term limits.
International politics are not democratic, but anarchic. No central authority is powerful enough to ensure fairness or enforce laws, so the only law is the tyranny of the strongest and anarchy.
That is a good thing. Let me remind you that anarchy does not mean chaos. The anarchic relationship between nations has been there reliably since the dawn of time. Countries in competition with each other bring advantages to the citizens. In Europe, when the natural relationship between the countries was undermined and the so-called anarchy was derailed, we called it the Soviet Union. Fundamental challenge and assorted variety in government structure is healthy and valuable for the citizens of Europe. Are we freely cooperating nation, states, or, as Kurzgesagt would argue, we can only sustain the peace through supranational structures?
So for most of human history, powerful countries took what they wanted from others, either by extortion or by violence.
Yes. Indeed, the EU is not going to change that.
After World War II, the United Nations were founded to overcome this anarchy by establishing rules on how countries should behave. But since the UN has virtually no power and its members often have opposing interests, it's usually politely ignored.
Oh, so the UN is useless now? Wait a minute. You mean the UN here, right? The United Nations came into being in 1945. following the devastation of the Second World War with one central mission, the maintenance of international peace and security. The UN does this by working to prevent conflict, helping parties in conflict make peace, peacekeeping, and creating the conditions to allow peace to hold and flourish. These activities often overlap and should reinforce one another to be effective. The UN Security Council has a primary responsibility for international peace and security. Didn't you upload a video about the EU before once? And said something similar about the NATO?
Immigration aside, many more challenges lie in the future, like defense. Traditionally, European countries have relied strongly on the protection of the US through NATO. But in the current political climate, Europe has to ask itself if it really wants to depend on the United States for its safety.
Ah, yes, indeed, the NATO. Let me briefly give you the whole shtick of the NATO. Security in our daily lives is key to our well-being. NATO's purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. The NATO and the United Nations, not having much to do, as you say, useless, is a good thing as well. It means there are no major wars currently between the member states. But of course, we don't need a NATO or the United Nations and a European joint army under the flag of the European Parliament, so one of them needs to be useless. And how do you say? Being ignored.
The EU is a construct that tries to have rules and laws for its member nations that are actually enforceable, as the European Court of Justice is able to make binding decisions. Originally, the EU was founded to ensure peace between European nations and prosperity for the continent. But it's also an attempt to gain international power for its members. It's like a superstate, and it's striving to be democratic and legitimized by all of its citizens. To do that, it has to solve the problem of different actors wanting different things. Only that its members are countries with very different priorities. So, how does this work? Since the EU is ridiculously complex, and politicians are even worse than scientists at naming things...
Well, first of all, that was hilarious. Politicians are worse naming things than scientists. Okay, that is actually true. Both are bad in naming things. Like for example, Jason E. Bond opted to name a spider he discovered after his favorite musician, Neil Young. His music and activism on peace and justice he appreciates. The resulting name was Myrmekiaphila Neil Youngi. After Kurzgesagt's own statements, they need between 500 to 800 hours to produce a single video. That means up to a month of non-stop research and animation. It would have been more effective if Kurzgesagt would have put in the real effort of actually trying to explain the inner mechanism of the EU, instead of this nice-looking infographic that in the end explains nothing. It just muddles the water. But then again, I guess that would have given the show away. Instead, we get this masculine-inspired dream of the EU in full HD that is so oversaturated. It gives me eye cancer.
and omit a lot of details. You can find further reading and explanations in our sources document.
The sources listed contains 15 links to the European Union site itself, which I find hilarious for a video entitled "Is the EU Democratic?" 6 Wikipedia articles, 3 Encyclopedia Britannica entries, 1 New York Times article, and some other interesting documents as well, like for example a document named Supranational, Federal, Intergovernmental. That one is actually worth reading.
Okay, if you want to create a democratic union of independent nations, you have 2 options. 1. Let everybody vote for national politicians who then make decisions for the union together. Or 2. Let every citizen vote directly for an independent institution that's able to make binding decisions. Both approaches have their upsides and downsides, and the EU ended up with a mix of both of them.
I just want to mention that no downsides are going to be discussed in this video.
Next to the European Court of Justice, there are 4 main institutions that we'll talk about today. The European Council, which is made up of the heads of government or states of the member countries. The Council of the EU, with ministers from the member countries. The third one is the European Commission, which is the de facto government of the EU, having 1 commissioner for each member state. And lastly, the European Parliament. The Parliament is the only part of the EU that is directly elected by you, dear citizen, in the European elections.
Let me repeat what Kurzgesagt just said.
The European Parliament. The Parliament is the only part of the EU that is directly elected by you, dear citizen, in the European elections. In principle, all of these institutions of the EU originate from your direct or indirect vote, be it at the national or EU level. But some do more than others. For example, you vote for your national representative and therefore contribute to form a national government whose head of state has a seat in the European Council. These leaders choose the President of the EU Commission and its fellow commissioners, who eventually are confirmed by the EU Parliament. So this is a sort of indirect democracy. You didn't vote for the Commission, but you voted for the people who appointed them and for those who confirmed and policed them. So in effect, 2.5 of the 4 main European Union institutions depend on the member state governments.
There's no such thing as an indirect vote or indirect democracy. And this is a part where I'm pissed off the most about this video, because there's a deliberate attempt of trying to present the EU democratic system as more democratic than it actually is, not only by words and arguments, but by visuals and sound. Let me show you what I mean. We actually just vote for the European Parliament. You yourself has said it just a couple of minutes before, and the voting power is not equal across a continent. A vote from Malta can be more powerful than the vote of an Italian, for example. Votes from stronger member states like Germany have more weight than votes from weak member states like Greece. Not very democratical at all. All this dilemma already before you consider that I can only vote for a few of those 73 representatives, and then each of those may align with different EU parties. There being 8 EU parties, each with their own proclivities. So the party I vote for in my MEP election doesn't necessarily represent the idols within the EU Parliament. The politician I vote for at home in my nation may not go to the EU Commission or Council, and most likely I voted for him or her, especially for my nation's parliament. Should I adjust the way I vote according to the needs of people I cannot vote for?
Today it has to approve new laws which can be binding for the member countries. It also votes on how the EU budget is spent and on international treaties. All of this makes the Parliament very powerful and thus your vote very influential, even on an international level. Compared to national parliaments, one major power is still missing though. The EU Parliament officially can't propose new laws on its own, which is often the core of the argument the EU is not democratic enough and that the European Parliament should be given more influence.
I have never heard this argument. Remember Article 13? No one asked for it. No one voted for it. The legislative power in the European Union is shared between the Parliament and the Council, none of which can propose a legislative initiative. The only directly elected body is the European Parliament, which cannot make any laws of its own. Let that sink in for a moment. The citizens of EU have no way to check on the legislature of the European Union, of which laws have greater power than their own state laws. In the European Commission, which has been granted all executive power of the Union, is also the only body with their power to make legislative initiatives. Whenever the Commission wants to make a law for other EU members states, this proposal is submitted to the Parliament and the Council, who then throw the initiative back and forth among each other to bypass multiple attempts of reaction. There can be up to 3 readings involved European Parliament and European Council separately. The final word is given by the Council, none of which members elected by the people. At no point of this legislative procedure can the citizens of the European Union make any contribution to or influence the process. But we still are forced to pay taxes to the EU because the Union has no budget of its own. Usually, great nation states like Germany and France have a greater influence than smaller countries. The reason why this is a problem is because these states tend to form coalitions to vote for proposals in common agreement. So in the end, people in the remaining 22 states are governed by a small group of people from electorate with whom they have nothing in common, and because European law overrides state law, constituencies of European nation states are in gradually greater and greater scale governed by the law they did not ask for and made by the people they did not vote for. People from the capital of Slovenia are made to follow and accept the same decisions and agendas as people from rural Denmark. These people have no history. They are from different cultures. They have no reason to be forced under one government. The biggest decision-making and agenda-setting powers are within the hands of unelected bodies that are known to make common decisions.
Right now, the member states' governments pretty much control the European Union. Giving the Parliament more power would make the EU as a whole more democratic, but it would also take power from member states. It's not clear which approach is better.
Don't you find it kinda odd that the video is showing a power struggle between many different independent little spaceships with birds in them? And the other side is just one ship. Do you find this more democratic? Like there are literally 14 birds versus 7.
Ultimately, it's for the member states and us as citizens to decide how the Union should develop.
I wouldn't be surprised if the next video would be called The EU and How It Should Evolve.
Okay, so can we draw a conclusion here? As a whole, the EU is not as democratic as most of its member states.
Finally, some much-needed admissions.
But it is democratic. If you don't like decisions they make, regarding copyright for example, you can look up what your representatives voted for and vote them out.
Unfortunately, the EU has no option of voting out representatives, of course. You can try voting for another one. Next time. But yeah, bad luck this time, fella. Speaking of representatives, there are many articles describing the huge extent corruption is affecting the EU. I will not go into them here, but unfortunately it is easier for big corporations to bribe one representative of a nation at the EU than bribing the whole parliament in their own nation. This is a real problem, and it will just get worse and worse over the time.
The struggle to make it more democratic is closely tied to who holds power over what. The EU keeps changing. You, dear citizen, are not only voting on the current politics, but also on what the system will look like in the future. There are many parties and politicians that vowed to make the EU Parliament, and therefore your vote, stronger. Many others want to keep it as it is, or even diminish it. It's for you to decide what you think is better for the future of the Union. Currently, it's equally important for the EU who you vote for at home, because these are the people who have the most influence in the European Union right now. Opinion.
Opinion all the way, baby.
At home is also where the EU is often used as a scapegoat. Politicians, especially before national elections, like to pretend the EU is all-powerful and makes up rules and laws over the heads of the governments and citizens, although often they were directly responsible for what the EU did.
Well, sure, you did point out that this is just an opinion. But man, this is poorly anecdotal, and you didn't provide any sources for this. Remember, just 1 month ago?
So, can you trust Kurzgesagt? You can trust that every video we make is thoroughly researched and approved by different experts. You can trust that we know that we have biases and we try to overcome them. We want to move Kurzgesagt further towards the trustworthy end of the spectrum.
And also, what do you want to achieve with this statement? Should we stop criticizing the EU, right?
Democracy is annoying and complicated and often very boring. In the European Union, even more so than in the member states. But voting and caring about how our political institutions change and develop is one of the most powerful things we can do as citizens. The last few years have shown that extreme things can happen through elections.
That is a problem because, as yourself said, the EU is less democratic than individual nation states, but yet overrides their laws. The subtle animation where the baby birdies get thrown into the abyss because of the Brexit vote is a cheap shot. What are you implying? Every time you vote for Brexit, a baby dies? Remember your sincere plea.
We want to move Kurzgesagt further towards the trustworthy end of the spectrum.
Because Europe is an important topic for us, we've translated this video into as many European languages as possible. A couple of European YouTubers narrated it and uploaded it to their own channels. Thank you to Funk.
Ah, yes. Funk. Now let's get back to the officialization of Kurzgesagt. Kurzgesagt is, as you may have guessed, already a German YouTube channel. You can visit the German YouTube channel, where you can see they belong to the Funk network. The Funk network belongs to ZDF and ARD, the German equivalent of public broadcasters, also named öffentlich-rechtliche, modeled after the World War in the image of BBC. The ARD has the highest tax for any public broadcasters in the entire EU. Funk is the same network responsible for some SJW propaganda like
Was ist Period Shaming eigentlich und wo kommt es her?
Ja, klingt erstmal bescheuert.
That's all for this video. I could go on and on about this. I am fully aware that this video will gather a majority of dislikes and mean comments, but I actually don't care, because my channel got demonetized a very long time ago. My most successful video got flagged and is ranked as restricted video, not suitable for general audience. Which is of course bullshit, as it shows only fine art according to contemporary art galleries. So goodbye, and remember, pay no attention to what the art critics say. A statue has never been erected in honor of a critic.